Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, the Biden administration's historic pick for the next Secretary of the Army. Plus, we look at a report on rates of STIs among military members and find out which branch has the most cases. And a new move to gain recognition for the Ghost Army unit that helped confuse the Nazis in World War II. And finally, our team of reporters and editors breaks down the more major military headlines from the week. With the latest news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. The Biden administration this week made a historic nomination for the next Secretary of the Army. If confirmed, Christine Wormuth would be the first woman to fill that role. Jen Judson joins Daniel Woolfolk for more.
A well-known national security professional has been nominated to serve as Secretary of the Army. Christine Wormuth has served in the think tank world as well as in the Pentagon. Defense News Land Warfare reporter Jen Judson is covering the story. Jen, welcome. Tell us a bit about Christine Wormuth.
So she's currently at the think tank RAND. She's been there for several years, and she's written extensively about national security and defense while there. But previously, she held the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy role at the Pentagon from 2014 to 2016, where she worked with both Chuck Hagel and Ash Carter, both defense secretaries. She, has spent a lot of time working on major issues, including leading the 2014 Quadrennial Defense Review. That's a pretty important body of work. She's worked for the White House, but she's also just had a very long career at the Pentagon in various roles, and has also worked at other think tanks. So I don't think that anyone can argue that she's not well respected in the policy circles, and I believe her nomination has been received widely as really great news for the Army.
So something interesting in your story is that people were expecting her to be nominated for Air Force Secretary. Why were people surprised that she was nominated to be Army Secretary?
So I think the Air Force Secretary job was a little bit more coveted than the Army job is right now, and I think that's because the Army right now is it's hard to be the service secretary there. They're in a major transition. They're trying to modernize the Army. It's very ambitious to go up against China and Russia. Budgets aren't going up, end strength isn't going to go up. It's a really challenging job. And there's a fear that the Army's budget will take hits to support Navy and Air Force ambitions. So she really does have the right level of expertise for this job, and knows the Army very well. There were some rumors that Christine Wormuth or Frank Kendall, the former Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, were either one was going to be Air Force Secretary and the other was going to be Army Secretary, and we didn't know how that was going to necessarily fall. We still don't know who the Air Force Secretary is, or if Frank Kendall will get that job, or if it'll be somebody else. But I think the White House was trying to make history here. The Air Force has had 4 female secretaries and the Army's had none. And so, aside from just being highly capable and qualified for this job, she's also making major history for the Army.
Modernization of the Army is surely going to be one of her priorities. Do we have any indication of what her approach would be?
I'm not sure what her approach will be yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing how she leads the Army and how she'll support or review the modernization efforts that are underway. And her job isn't going to be easy. The Army has a track record, with major modernization efforts in recent years not going so well. So succeeding is going to be really critical.
So what challenges is she up against?
I mean, the biggest one is that the Army is like full steam ahead on a lot of modernization efforts. She's walking into a lot of the efforts are at the nascent stages, but the schedules are very ambitious. Things are going to be happening really fast in terms of fielding new long-range precision fires and future vertical lift, next generation combat vehicles, so many different things. So she's just going to have to really fight to preserve funding, to make sure that everything's on track, and to make sure that organizations are aligned properly within the Army to do all of this amid declining flat budgets and an end strength that's not going to grow.
And why is it that we see nominees so often from the think tank world?
I think there's a new push to not consider, former military, to not consider industry. Industry ties have been criticized in recent past in terms of nominations. So choosing folks that have Pentagon experience already and who have spent their time thinking very hard about these issues are not controversial, but they're also highly qualified people.
Jen, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And now for industry news. Korea Aerospace Industries unveiled South Korea's first homegrown fighter jet prototype this month, representing a major boost for the country's self-reliant defense capability 5 years after the KF-X program began. The prototype of the twin-engine jet named KF-21 Barame is showcased during a rollout ceremony at KAI headquarters. 40 KF-21s are expected to be delivered to the Air Force by 2028, and 80 more jets will enter the service by 2032. The KF-21 is considered a 4.5 generation aircraft, on par with the latest F-16 and less stealthy than the 5th generation F-35 Lightning II developed by Lockheed Martin. The U.S. Air Force's newest F-15EX variant has a new name. It's the Eagle II. The Air Force placed its first order for the F-15EX in July 2020, awarding a contract for the first lot of 8 jets with a value not to exceed about $1.2 billion. All of those aircraft are set to be delivered to Eglin Air Force Base by fiscal year 2023. The second lot of the F-15EX planes is on schedule for delivery in fiscal year 2024 to Kinsley Field Air National Guard Base in Oregon. In total, the service plans to buy at least 144 F-15 Eagle IIs. The upgrades in the Eagle IIs include a digital cockpit, a more advanced ADCP-2 mission computer from Honeywell, as well as fly-by-wire flight controls. Lockheed Martin scored a $1.1 billion contract from the U.S. Army to build another 11,000 rockets for the Guided Multiple Launch Rocket System. The award came on the heels of another successful test of an extended range version in development. The ERGM-LRS traveled more than 135 kilometers in the test at White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico. That's according to a company news release. The company will supply more than 9,000 GM-LRS unitary and alternative warhead rockets, as well as 2,000 low-cost, reduced-range practice rockets. It will also provide logistics support to the U.S. Army, the U.S. Marine Corps, and its international customers. The alternative warhead version was developed to hit targets without the risk of leaving unexploded ordnance in the area. GM-LRS production will take place in the United States and is expected to be finished by September. Lockheed has already delivered 50,000 GM-LRS rockets to the Army. And that's it in the defense world. When we return, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack busts some credit score myths. The military and defense market is constantly evolving. Stay on top of the latest news with Sightline Media Group's live events. Continue to learn, understand new tools and technologies. We're live. You're on in 3. Defense, government, and industry leaders come together for successful and proven engaging events. You'll gain valuable insight, get the chance to ask questions, all from the comfort of your own home or office. Sign up for our events newsletters and receive alerts for upcoming live streams.
Welcome back. In military news this week, President Joe Biden has announced that U.S. troops will stay in Afghanistan beyond a previous May 1st deadline. The new goal for bringing troops home will be the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, the event that started the decades-long conflict. The May 1st deadline had been negotiated with the Taliban by the Trump administration. Defense Department officials said there are about 2,500 U.S. troops still in the country, performing training and counterterrorism missions. In other news, the rate of sexually transmitted infections in the military is on the rise. But a new study has some surprisingly specific information on who is getting STIs, right down to which job specialty contracts the most. Military Times' Harm Venheisen has more.
Over the past 8 years, the rates of chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis have been increasing significantly across the military. And that's according to the March edition of the military's peer-reviewed medical journal, the Medical Surveillance Monthly Report. They evaluated chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, genital herpes, and HPV, the 5 most common STDs, in all available military medical records from 2012 to 2020. So they were able to look at the medical and administrative codes, identify cases of STDs, and then link them to demographic groups. Overall, they found that while growth rates and decrease rates matched the civilian population, the actual rates were disproportionately higher in the military. There was that 2015 study that showed a significant portion of the military does engage in sexual risk behaviors that put them at increased risk for contracting STDs. The military averaged 3 to 4 times the average number of chlamydia cases as the civilian population. Across the military, chlamydia cases grew 64% between 2013 and 2019, which is the closest I can really get to the CDC's numbers, which are available from 2012 to 2018. And they showed an increase of just under 20% in the civilian population. So almost 3 times the increase in the military for cases of chlamydia. And men averaged much fewer cases than women did. Because they were able to go through and find all these administrative medical codes, they were also able to link them to different soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And they found that motor transportation workers had the highest rates of chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. So they beat out every other occupational specialty. Healthcare occupations had the highest rates of HPV. And then communications and intelligence specialists, transportation, and healthcare workers, all 3 tied for the highest rates of genital herpes. So service members aged 18 through 24 had the highest rates of these STDs. And as they progressed in age, they decreased in rates of STDs. Female service members had significantly higher incident rates of every STD other than syphilis, in which males had 1.3 times the rate of occurrence. But this could have been contributed to STI screening programs. So women are screened more heavily for STIs and reproductive sexual health. So improved screening availabilities for men over the period of the study could have contributed to some of the rising case counts we saw in men and more of the equaling out between the sexes. Enlisted service members and those with lower levels of education tended to have higher rates of all STIs, and then married service members had the lowest rates across the board when compared with single service members and those who had never been married or had an unknown marital status. There weren't a ton of suggestions in the report, but the military suggestions by and large are to limit your number of sexual partners, to always practice safe sex, use a condom, and don't assume that just because you can't see any signs of an STD that your partner doesn't have one.
Thanks, Harm. Back in World War II, deception was a key tactic in causing confusion among German forces as Allied commanders tried to close in on victory. Jesse Carango brings us a story of a new effort to gain recognition for the masters of that deception.
During the final year of World War II, a group of 1,000 United States troops was assembled to trick German forces. Rick Beyer, the president of the Ghost Army Legacy Project, is currently spearheading a movement that awards the former service members who were part of this organization with the Congressional Gold Medal. He spoke to us about the methods this group used to save an estimated 30,000 lives. Rick, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
What kind of specific tactics did they have on the battlefield? And are these tactics still being used today?
Wow, great question, Jesse. So they were a traveling roadshow of deception because they were capable of carrying out a deception and then packing it all up overnight and traveling 200 miles and carrying out another deception someplace else. And they're usually pretending to be a division-sized force or maybe an armored combat command. And to do this, they are multimedia. They have visual deception, which is like inflatable tanks and artillery that enemy spotters can see. They have sound effects played by giant 500-pound speakers mounted on half tracks. So that if the enemy is listening in at night, they're hearing the sounds of troops moving up. They created fake radio networks. So when the enemy is listening into our radio transmissions, they think they hear the 5th Armored Division when in fact they hear the Ghost Army. And finally, they did a 4th dimension of special effects, a 4th dimension of deception that they called special effects. And that really involved turning them all into actors. They're wearing phony shoulder patches for the unit they're impersonating. They're driving through towns in trucks with phony markings. They're setting up phony headquarters, and literally, a captain or a major is wearing general stars and pretending to be a general. And that's to fool any enemy spies left behind as the Germans are retreating. And I think if you think about it, it's like, yeah, they're not leading the massed attack. They're not putting themselves in danger the way some of our amazing frontline troops did, but they are out there with very little in the way of weaponry, real weaponry, essentially drawing German attention to themselves and saying, look at us over here, fire on us. And they're literally drawing fire without really the means to defend themselves in any substantial way. And I think that is a tremendously brave thing to do. And so I think they deserve any recognition and any honors that they can get.
Efforts to award this group started 6 years ago, according to Bayer, and legislation to honor these soldiers has just received its 290th House sponsor. Companion legislation is coming soon to the Senate. Currently, there are only 11 members of the Ghost Army that are still alive. I'm Jesse Karangu for Defense News Weekly.
When we come back, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack breaks down common credit score myths. And later, a look at more of this week's top headlines from our editorial staff. On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack sheds some light on common credit score myths.
Credit scores affect such a large part of our financial lives. Landlords use them to approve renters. Financial institutions use them to approve loans. And utility companies even use them to determine your deposit amount. It's no wonder there are so many apps out there giving you credit advice. But is it the right advice? With so much information out there, it's important you know the facts and debunk the myths to help you along your credit journey. Myth number 1, you only need to check your credit if you're applying for a loan. While some of us probably wish this was true, every consumer should be checking their score periodically throughout the year, at least once a year at the very bare minimum. But most financial institutions offer free credit scores within their app, so definitely use it. Myth number 2, the way you use your debit cards can sometimes affect your credit score. While debit cards can be a great budgeting tool, these accounts don't actually impact your credit score. It's pretty much like using cash. And myth number 3, bad credit scores last forever. Fortunately, bad credit scores can turn into great ones. You can turn it around by making smart financial decisions like paying your bills on time. Using autopay is the easiest way to make that happen. Credit scores are too important to ignore. So stick to the facts and practice great money and debt habits, and you'll be the master of your credit destiny.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more of our coverage, be sure to check out our headlines online at Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com and DefenseNews.com. To get a list of our top stories in your inbox every weekday, subscribe to our Early Bird Brief. And make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And when we come back, analysis from Military Times editors and reporters on some of the other big stories of the week. New budget priorities, ongoing sexual assault problems, and a looming threat in the form of China's Navy. The Military Times team of reporters and editors dives in on some of the biggest topics of the week in this edition of the Reporters Roundtable.
We cannot continue the cycle of extending or expanding our military presence in Afghanistan, hoping to create ideal conditions for the withdrawal
Welcome to the Military Times Reporters Roundtable. I'm Leo Shane, Capitol Hill Bureau Chief for Military Times. Each week we bring you the news behind the biggest headlines. And this week the biggest headline was Afghanistan. After almost 20 years at war there, President Joe Biden announced that we're going to withdraw all troops from the country by September 11th. This is obviously very big news. I have with me here today our Pentagon Bureau Chief, Megan Myers, and our Executive Editor, Andrew Tillman. Both of you, thanks for coming. Megan, talk to me about what our troop presence is in Afghanistan right now and what this means to start pulling folks out.
So there are 2,500 troops on the ground in Afghanistan officially. It's unclear whether that includes special operations forces or not. But in any case, the task now for CENTCOM and for the services is to start looking at their rotation calendars and see who's scheduled to come home in the next few months, who's going to need to replace people in the next few months, and how they're going to be able to keep the presence, particularly the security and the counter ISIS presence that they have there, steady for the next few months until they can kind of bring it back down in September while keeping the forces who are still there and the forces who are leaving safe.
And I know President Biden was looking at a May 1st deadline that was set by the previous administration to get all troops out of there. One of the comments that the White House had said was that it wasn't safe to pull folks out that quickly. They needed more time to review and everything. So does that extra few months really create that much more safety, or is this just prolonging some of the process?
One of the big parts, one of the more important parts of withdrawing troops is getting rid of all of the equipment that is there, either being able to bring it home or pass it along to Afghan troops if that's what the plan is, or to destroy things in some cases. And that was a lot of the concern about the May 1st deadline, is that physically you could move people out, but the important equipment that we have there, you don't want it to fall into the wrong hands. And so how are they going to be able to get all of that out on the May 1st deadline? Now they have a few more months to figure that stuff out.
Okay, so that's what it means for the Pentagon. Andrew, what does this mean for the military at large and for security in the region?
Well, I think this is going to be really big news around the world. I mean, it doesn't really come as a huge surprise to us because we've been tracking it, but the world is going to take note. And I think that the analogy that the Pentagon would dread is, the Soviets were in Afghanistan for a while and they pulled out, and that really wasn't a very good sign for the future of their military powers. Afghanistan, as we've talked about for many years, is a really strategically located place. I mean, it borders Iran, it borders China, it's close to Russia, and it really gave us a lot of operational flexibility across the whole, of Eurasia. And, if we're going to pull everybody out and we're not going to have that, that's a setback in terms of future operations. So as much as everyone for 20 years has said we weren't there in Afghanistan, to occupy it militarily, that was realistically one of the reasons we were there, is because of its strategic advantage. And I think that, the people inside the Pentagon who plan these kinds of operations are going to note that. And I think our adversaries are also going to note that we no longer have that as a launching pad.
Yeah, that's a good point. Megan, what does withdrawal mean? I mean, are we going to have everybody out, or are we still going to have some teams of folks working in the region?
That remains to be seen, and it may be a little bit difficult to even suss that out in the next few months, because the Pentagon is a little reluctant to give the footprint of the special operations forces that are in Afghanistan. And so there's still a very important, anti-counterterrorism mission in Afghanistan. We are committed to, stomping out ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, and there is also a contingent in Afghanistan. So it seems likely that there will be a small footprint of special operations forces for that mission.
No, and that's a great point. And that's one of the big questions here. I know on Capitol Hill right now, there's a lot of concerns about what the details are and just how is this going to be? Are there some conditions that will be followed here? Is there any way to pull it back? Or if things get worse, will the president consider leaving folks there for a while? So still a lot of questions to get answered. I guess the big one for you two is, where do we go from here? Do we think that this is going to finally be the end of this war, or is this just, yet another phase, yet another transition? We've talked about the forever war for so long. It's hard to think of a time when there's not a sizable troop presence in Afghanistan. Andrew, what do you think?
Well, we did pull out of Iraq officially in 2011, and we were not there for several years. But, with the rise of ISIS, and I believe it was 2016, we went back. And I think that with Afghanistan, we can pull everybody out, but we're still going to have a real detailed knowledge of that country. It has a really good military infrastructure that we built. We still have a lot of relationships with the Afghan security forces. So, President Biden can pull us out, but it's going to be very easy to go back in if at any point we feel like we need to.
Well, that's something we'll be watching over the next few months and frankly, probably the next few years. So thank you to both of you for your thoughts. You can read more about this at militarytimes.com, and we'll see you next week.
And that's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.